Ian, you're already a co-host.
Oh,
I think.
I am. Shall I try using my presentation for myself, or will you do it?
Whatever you want. If you want me to do it for you, I will do it. No problem.
I would also prefer, Edwin, if you can, because I have not yet.
It's open. It's open, so.
Okay, Edwin, you just go ahead, do it.
Quite people prefer so.
Fred, shall I start or would you like to start?
I can start if you want. Should we wait for 2 minutes? So
yeah, sure.
People still joining us, yeah? So hello, everybody. We will start in 2 minutes. Thank you for your patience.
Hello.
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 Hello from Italy.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. We will start in 1 minute. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this ESHA leadership call. I'm Fred Verboon. I work for the European School Heads Association. Likewise, my colleague, Edwin Katerberg, who will be your host today. It's actually Edwin's birthday, so we have a very nice day, Edwin.
Thank you.
So today is the webinar. It's about inclusion of migrant children, but Edwin is going to talk a little bit more about that. ESHA, we are an association and we represent school heads all over Europe. We combined now represent about 93,000 school heads in Europe, and our members are national associations of school heads. We are all about improving education, and we focus on 3 themes. One is innovative pedagogies. Second one is professional development of school heads. And the last one is well-being of children. And the last one, of course, is also the central theme of today's webinar, where we talk about inclusion of migrant children. Today's seminar will be recorded. So if you don't want that your face could be on the ESHA website, because afterwards we're going to post this webinar on the ESHA website. So the person who want to see this call can also look at it. You can just turn off your microphone and then also turn off your camera so nobody could see you in this call. So thank you very much for being here. I hope you have a very interesting call. And without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Edwin Katerberg. He's your host for today, and hope to see you all next time again. Thank you very much. Edwin?
Hello, everybody. My name is Edwin. I'm Fred's colleague at the European School Heads Association. As you probably know, we do various projects across across countries, and we have started this leadership series of seminars, basically, to make sure that our membership, which are the school leaders of Europe, become a bit more familiar with what we are doing, and we hope that we can get a buy-in from them. This is the 6th seminar in the series. We hope that there's many more to come. And this is about one of our projects called Child Up. We have an illustrious group of people that are going to present a bit. The Child Up project stands for Children Hybrid Integration, Learning Dialogue as a way of upgrading policies of participation. We basically received funding from the European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Program. And we research, well, we don't research, but we have a team of researchers in 7 countries that research different levels of integration of migrant children in Europe. And we propose to an innovative approach to improve the social condition and to disseminate the project outcomes by involving international and national stakeholders that we have identified. The speakers are generally from within the project. So I would like to give the word first to Claudio Dondi, who who represents IIHL. Claudio, maybe you can explain a bit more about yourself and what you want to talk about.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to ESHA for giving this opportunity to the Child Up project to be presented to a relevant audience of people. As Edwin say, I'm Claudio Dondi. I work at the International Institute of Humanitarian Law in Sanremo, who plays a role in the communication, dissemination, and impact maximization of the project. So I'm the list of partners, if Edwin can help me with the slides, the list of partners of this project is starting with Unimore, that is the University of Modena and Reggio Emilia, where the coordination of the project is run. Then you see the logo of my institute with the white swan celebrating 50 years of existence. And then you have ESHA. I will not go through all the other partners. They are normally research partners that will have the floor in the next presentation. In total, we are 10 partners, and we are working with research in 7 countries, plus ESHA and FREREF represent European networks. And so the Netherlands and France are not fields for research. You can move to the next slide. What is Child Up doing? It wants to promote an innovative approach to transform migrant children's social condition. What does it mean? It rejects essentially the approach of assimilation, the essentialist approach. So migrants should become exactly as nationals of the country where they land. It rejects the segregation and protectionist approach. Migrants should keep their culture and not be contaminated, and proposes what in the title is called hybrid integration. That means it relies on the fact that with the support of teachers and mediators and language teachers, migrant children can progressively exercise their agency and choose which elements they want to keep from the original culture from where they come, and which element they want to acquire from the culture of the host country where they live. That is very basic. Of course, other researchers will be able to explain you better. this concept, but it's not a trivial approach because, as you know, migration is one of the big fields of political confrontation, and sometimes it becomes a very critical issue for conversation. So an innovative approach, amongst its objectives and activities, it reviews policies and practice of integration, social inclusion in schools, reception center, and in the local communities. And this will be presented to you as the results of Work Package 3. It studies children's and parents' experiences, perceptions, and expectation. So it goes deep with a quantitative and qualitative analysis in understanding their experiences and their point of view on the inclusion and integration process. It documents in particular specific practices of language learning, facilitation of dialogue, intercultural education and mediation, so innovative methodology to allow the intercultural dialogue, and support the migrant children's exercise of agency in changing their own condition of integration and constructing hybrid identities, the concept that I was trying to explain before. Now, what's in it for you, for an audience of school heads and teachers? Essentially, well, you see coming soon, because in fact, these products are expected to become available as soon as the research activities are finished. And in this case, we are thinking about September of this year. We will have guidelines for dialogic activities in schools, written and online training packages, and self-evaluation package for the school to see how far it is in the process of inclusion and integration. The next slide, please. I'm going to the final part of the area in which I have more direct responsibility together with Edwin, ESHA, and FREREF. We designed in this project and articulated a project to stakeholder involvement. Stakeholders are considered partners in all phases of research, from the agenda definition to the research implementation, and finally in dissemination and the maximization of impact. We believe in bottom-up dissemination and impact. So we are trying to involve as far as possible the staff of schools, but also the local communities in validating the quality and the effectiveness of the practices that are studied in order to diffuse their use through communities of practice. Expectations, concerns, good practice, difficulties expressed by stakeholders are feeding research and approaches to new policies and practice. So this is the approach that we had since the very beginning. Then, next slide, please. We went through, as you all have experienced, the COVID-19 crisis. We self-assessed what we were able to do and what we were not able to do well enough in the stakeholders' involvement activities. And so we are now in a transition phase that has been defined exactly this month through several internal and external meetings that the group for communication, dissemination, and impact has conducted. And so we are moving from a rather static approach of local stakeholders committees, one in each of the 7 countries, in the 7 cities where the research project takes place, to the idea of moving a little bit further, from the idea of committees to an idea of something much more dynamic, in which the project is not the only object of interaction, but the broader problem of inclusion in school, also considering that other groups, other disadvantaged groups can be considered relevant experience to improve the approach. From meetings with international stakeholders representatives to a more continuous interaction in special interest groups, and from offering results of the project to stakeholders, the inside-out approach to involving stakeholders in shaping innovation and producing positive outcomes together. So we are calling stakeholders to enter 1 or 2 levels more inside the dialogue among researchers and help researchers to become even more relevant in what they are searching and what they are proposing. So that's, I think, almost all I have to say. There is an invitation, of course, to all of you to visit, if you put the next and last slide, to visit the website, childup.eu, and discover that you can become part of the community of the project. In the beginning of next week, we will launch a mini survey to understand how you lived this period, what kind of difficulties were emerging as most important during the COVID time, related, of course, to the problem of inclusion of children with migrant background, and what kind of opportunity you see from this destabilization, more use of digital education, etc., etc. So thank you all for your attention. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Claudio. Now the floor is for Dr. Shannon Damery. She's working with with CEDEM, the Center for Ethnic and Migration Studies at the Social Sciences Institute of the University of Liège. She will now talk about work package 3, which they were leading and was finished a few months ago. The title of her presentation is an overview of migrant children's integration and educational challenges and the corresponding local level best practices in 7 selected European countries. Shannon, I will share your presentation now. So the floor is yours. Just a moment.
Oh, if you want, I can try and share my screen instead. I can.
Yeah, whatever you want.
Yeah, maybe it's easier because I will skip through some slides that Claudio already covered.
No problem. No problem.
So it looks like it says I'm not able to. Maybe you have to. Anyway.
Let me just share it now. You just you can just say skip.
So you can skip to the 6th slide. I think we've covered all the rest. So the research was, of course, taking place in 7 different countries. So in Belgium, in Finland, in Germany, Italy, Poland, Sweden, and the UK. But what's perhaps more important than that is the local places where we actually ended up conducting research. So a lot of what we'll be talking about is more what's important at the local level. So if we go to the next slides, I will be talking a bit about what we did to sort of prepare for the quantitative and qualitative research. So for this part of the research, we did a review of the scientific and grey literature that existed on the integration policies and pathways in the different countries, in how sort of the education systems were set up. And then we sent questions that we had about the school systems and obstacles and best practices, ways of including migrant children to the partners, so that the partners who were really the experts on the national and local context could fill them out, and sort of they had their own kind of report that they sent back to us. And then we did a thematic analysis of this information from the partners so we could find the points of convergence and divergence. And then finally, we produced the final reports with this synthesized information that you can find on the website. So on the next slide, you will see that one of the sort of problems that we encountered very early on. In fact, clear data about the outcomes of programming designed to support migrant children in their integration is often limited, and there are a lot of different reasons for this. There are differences in the types of data that different countries collect, and there's a difference between local level data and data from other levels. There's also the reality of the situation is that a lot of initiatives that focus on the inclusion of migrant background children really exist only at the local level. But the objectives of the programs and the obstacles that the programs faced were still enlightening for us. So on the next slide, I just have a list of sort of some of the key points that we found when we were looking at the obstacles and what we started kind of calling inspirational practices, because best practices they're hard to define what is best, but things that hopefully could inspire people in other locations or in other lines of work, or doing the same work, to maybe use these practices that have worked well already. So we start off by trying to find out where migrant young people are and why they're in these places and in these particular schools. So this idea of whether or not the practice in a location is to have a concentration of migrant young people or to disperse migrant young people equally or evenly. Then there were a lot of programs around mentoring in all of the countries. There were programs to combat discrimination and bullying. And finally, there were programs that centered around the support of the migrant background children's or migrant children's mother tongue, and also language learning of the local language. So on the next slide, we will start just a little bit, just a brief overview of this sort of concentration versus dispersion sort of idea. And what we started to see was that there was no obvious best option. Both practices offer opportunities and challenges for migrant children. So in Belgium, there's something called the freedom of school choice, which means that you don't have to send your child to the school near to where you live, for example, but they can go anywhere. Now, there are more and more different restrictions and policies around this, but that's just a general overview. But in the Flemish community, for example, there have been efforts to sort of combat the segregation and inequality that sometimes results from this freedom of school choice way of doing things. So there was an effort of local education organizations that resulted in a project that encourages non-migrant families to put their children in schools with high numbers of migrant background children, and to promote the benefits that this would have for non-migrant children. So this experience of diversity and learning about other cultures. And what's interesting though is that a counterexample is that in Poland, it's more often functions in that migrant children become dispersed between schools, and that it ends up that there's sort of less money and fewer resources invested into specifically supporting migrant children. So it may end up that there are a limited number of staff who are trained and experienced in working with migrant children because there's not so much demand in one particular school. And potentially this is an issue that could be combated if there were more migrant children in one individual school. But at the same time, if migrant children are concentrated in a school, it can mean that they have fewer opportunities to build social capital with non-migrant background children, and to have some of these informal opportunities for integration language learning. So on the next slides, I think, yes, we talk a bit about mentoring. So following on from this issue of the necessity of contact between migrant and non-migrant populations, we see that in order to promote cultural exchange and to allow migrant and non-migrant people to build diverse cultural capital, these mentoring programs have been really proven to support integration and to have benefits for young people in education, but also for adults in the labor market. This kind of practice is becoming increasingly popular in schools. It's a broad category of things that can be mentoring, but mentoring peer-to-peer, students between students is increasingly popular. And there's also the case where you have sometimes an adult, some kind of like a mediator, for example, or a teacher who becomes a mentor for one or a few students. So one thing that I should point out is that all of this work was done before the COVID crisis. So I imagine that the terrain and the things look quite differently now. But what was interesting is that we did this work and looked a bit at the importance of mentoring and how people are using mentoring more and more. And in some schools that we're seeing in the work that we're doing in work package 5 and 6, the more qualitative work, that some of these programs are impossible now. So student-to-student mentoring, some teachers have told us, is no longer possible. But then there are also some opportunities. So we saw at a school in Belgium where a teacher said that he was a physical education teacher, and because he's no longer able to teach his classes, the school told him to use his teaching hours to find students who weren't showing up for online classes and to follow them. And so he really appreciated this freedom to focus on individual students and follow them longer term. On the next slide, you'll see that we have some information about discrimination and bullying. In Germany and the UK, there were two quite different approaches to this. So in the UK, schools are required to create a policy, but there's not really specific guidelines on this and what should be included. And in Germany, there's a federal program against bullying in schools, which was launched in 2018. And more than 200 social workers were trained as what they call respect coaches to help schools combat religious bullying. So rather than leaving it up to the schools to create a policy of their own, this federal level guidance offered some uniformity, some clear minimum standards, as well as the possibility for sharing good practices across schools and regions. But at the same time, in the UK, there's more freedom to target their policies against bullying and discrimination to the actual local level problems that they can see. So in the next slide, we'll speak a bit very briefly about language. That is obviously a huge issue. So language learning has been found to be a crucial factor in pupil school success and in their social integration and then in their future employment. And the OECD found that countries where the achievement gap between non-migrant and migrant students is smaller are those with robust language programming, which is maybe not a surprise. But for example, in Germany, where there's robust language support, the type and scope of support varies from state to state. So I gave an example here of a program that started actually at a very local level. It's actually not on the slide, at the very local level in Berlin, and then spread to other states and other places across the country, where local alliances between schools and children and youth facilities were formed so that students could be accompanied long-term through their advancement through school. And because that was successful, they were able to replicate it. And then we have the example of Poland, where there's targeted support for language learning for children, but there is a problem that return migration, so you have children who have Polish citizenship, and because they have Polish citizenship, they won't qualify for certain language supports, even though they actually are migrant children who have lived abroad most of their lives and are struggling to learn Polish, and they could benefit from this language support that is possible for other children. And so I will just finish up. I think the next slide should be the last one. No, these are where my examples are. So the next slide is the last one. Basically, what we can say, if we can sum up something so enormous and complex, which is very difficult to do, is that there really needs to be synergy between all these local levels, and that between all of the levels, not just the local level, but that they all had a part to play. So it's particularly useful to have local level actions that have a certain amount of freedom, flexibility, because they're the experts in what's happening in their local situation, but that they need to be supported by higher level policy and practices and funding, and that we were able to learn about some of these particularly interesting local level needs and practices because of the expertise of all the partners who were working in these local levels themselves. So I apologize that I can't stay for the whole discussion, but I'm sure if you have questions, my colleagues can probably answer them. Thank you.
We can't hear you. Oh.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Shannon, for explaining what the situation is basically for in educating migrant children all over Europe. Next up is Ian. Ian Mackey is an educational coach with an interest in experiential therapeutic practice. He was a school leader or school head for a prolonged period of time. And he has a lot of interest and a lot of course, experience for inclusion of children. His presentation will be about the universal inclusion needs of young people and the particular needs of migrant children and their gifts to an institution. Ian, just give me a minute. I will share your presentation.
Okay, thanks, Edwin. I have to correct you. My name is Ewan.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Many people get it wrong. I'm speaking from the north of Scotland. So periphery part of Europe, as we say, part of the UK, but showing the variance, I think, as Shannon has said, in every country, there are different pockets, different experiences of culture and migrants. So I'm not part of the project, but I was interested in it when Edwin asked me if I could maybe contribute. And I've looked at some of the themes you see on the right-hand side there. And I like the term agency very much. And yes, hybrid as well is interesting too. So yes, I'm interested generally as being a head teacher for over 30 years and then 10 years as a coach supporting my colleagues in Scotland. And at the start of my experience up here in the north of Scotland, migrants were not a feature in our schools. In fact, the reverse was that young people and families were leaving here and there was a problem of depopulation. That has changed. And we have had people coming here to make better lives up here in the north. So I'm talking about the inclusion needs of young people and relating this to the particular needs of migrant children and their gifts to an institution. So could we have the next slide? So I'm looking at it from a kind of therapeutic approach, and I am happy to share these two comments by Irvin Yalom, Diana Whitmore, about young people, just to reflect on them. Yalom is saying that mental health and well-being are related to these positive interactions in family, friends, and peer groups. When young people feel they're included, they're more likely to have well-being. If they're excluded in any way, for them, that can be devastating. The second quote from Diana Whitmore. Diana works with disaffected young people who are being excluded from school or are losing their place in school. And she strongly says that young people need to feel valued and have meaning. If you take those two quotes together, you can see how young people could be prone to, if they are disengaged with school, to finding negative influences in gangs and negative approaches to society, looking for ownership and a feeling of meaning with people who are not good for them. This is particularly an issue for those who are perceived to be or feel to be from an outside origin. And that would be migrants often, but not always, because even within the UK and where I'm talking about, when we have young people coming from the south of Scotland or from England or Wales or other parts of the UK, they can often feel outsiders. And it may take a lot of time before they can feel at home with the young people here. And the fourth point is that while we're talking about migrants, it's quite natural, but it's important to remember that each of these young people are far more than a migrant. They're an individual and have individual characteristics, which are far more than just being labeled a migrant. Next slide, please. Now, here are some universal conditions for well-being for young people in schools and institutions. And the first thing I would mention is this, that all of our cultures, in inverted commas, are perceptions. And we often and frequently have misperceptions of other people's cultures. We may presume people coming from a particular country are poor. And we have also misperceptions about our own country. And I raise it that there are ambiguities about this, and we can often classify people from our stereotypes and our perceptions of other countries and other cultures. I also want to talk about this notion of integration, which is a term which we would like as school leaders or managers of education to feel we would like to integrate people in for their well-being or for some other reasons. But I would say that it's far more important to look at from the child and individual's view that they feel included. And there's a difference in there. Inclusion is, and this, it was actually Dutch teachers mentioned this to me, feeling included is the important thing, rather than do I want to feel included? Anyway, to push on, because there's quite a lot of things in this, here are 4 different characteristics for conditions for welfare and well-being. The first one, as everyone would accept, is feeling safe and secure. This relates to how young people from any from any source come into a school, how they're inducted, how we build up carefully the new routines for them. And I like the Swedish word trygghet, because it's far more than safe or secure. It's a relationship in that they feel safe in their relationships and well-being. Crucially, pastoral care comes into this, and an individual adult, possibly their teacher, hopefully their teacher, takes a strong interest in them. And this relates to the mentoring aspect that Shannon was talking about. It's useful for migrant children to have that adult. It could be a teacher, it could be a support worker who's assigned and has a positive relationship right from the beginning in mentoring. And in addition to that is what we would call here buddying, which is a peer-to-peer relationship of other young people helping to see that they are with them at break times and moving about, and they're always there to give some additional help. I would say with this feeling safe and secure is an immediate kind of reassurance of the young person's individual uniqueness and value, that they are more than just someone who's come from somewhere else, but there's a real interest in what they're like to do, what their characteristics are. I remember one young man who came to my school, and we discovered he had a great skill in piano playing, and we were immediately able to arrange he could have access to a piano. Fabulous young person. But each young person is an individual, and particularly if they're coming from outside, it's important to give them that individual uniqueness. Finally, importantly, and this relates to those who are refugees or have come through some kind of circumstance, that they may have met some kind of trauma. And speaking to Red Cross workers who have been involved in the counselling of young people who have been refugees, we have to be aware of potential trauma, both direct and what's called ambiguous trauma. And this is in relation to young people who have arrived in our countries, in our school, but they are left with some ambiguity of what's happened to other people, their family perhaps, or people they've met on their journey. There is issues of broken attachment, if you know about attachment theory. And there can be strong separation anxiety for them if they're to be separated from their family or other people that they've come. They are more prone to worry extremely and feel unsettled if they're separated. You know most of the issues about communication and language, but there is a real immediate need for communication needs, particularly dialogue with the family and access to translators if their language is not supported in the school. It may even, there is an issue here even about dialects. As I've said before, young people coming from other parts of the UK may find the local dialect difficult, and their own dialect is met with, being a bit foreign. Differentiated language instruction in their host and own language is important. And that's been, I think, already mentioned by Shannon, how important, and it depends on the resources. One school in Glasgow I know had 27 different languages within the school, and the challenge is immense in that way. So it needs certain types of approaches which go beyond actual language translation, communications and mathematics to explain terms, visual prompts, immediately for young people so that they're able to express their needs is top of the priority. Just mentioning that the immersion impact takes several months to kind of impact on language being affiliated in and hearing the native language takes several months. Nearing the finish now, ordered freedom is a concept I like, and I think this is in chimes with the term agency. And within this, it is related to empowerment and self-determination. And it is very useful to think in terms of what opportunities are within classroom for all young people, but particularly for migrants, to have a sense of they can choose certain things, and there can be negotiation about which things are best for them to be immersed in and which things not. Managed opportunities for their own study and language, and that can be time out for them to do interest of their own language materials. And the parental and family involvement are very important in this, to have this dialogue, particularly at the beginning of their induction, is to be continually having a dialogue to see what ways best can be resolved. Finally, grace. They're valued for their unique characteristics and not labeled as a migrant, but we accept and embrace where they come from and who they are. Finally, the last slide. Edwin, have you got next slide? Yeah, okay. So just a brief thing about the gifts of migrant children and families. Now, we're looking from a perspective from up here and seeing this is very valuable to have fresh people and young people coming in with difference into our classrooms. First of all, there's this entitlement. This is the immense thing of, I think, of importance to say that we embrace people coming in, and we want to make them feel included in our schools and our classrooms. In education, they provide real diversity in cultural, ethnicity, and religious breadth. It challenges the presumptions about outsiders or prejudices or norms, and it requires problem solving at different levels, demonstrating flexibility and compromise. There's a dialogue of differences and similarities. It gives experience, opportunities for young people to engage with difference. It offers opportunities to give support, resolve issues, embodying and translating. I recall one 14-year-old young girl who was in real difficulties in her life as a migrant person, but was able to volunteer to work in one of our nurseries and to help in the translation of a young 2-3-year-old who is in there. And this act of being able to volunteer and use her language was immense for her, and it gave her a real sense of meaning. And lastly, I think if we embrace these young people coming in, we notice how it gives new experiences and new energy and culture to our institutions. Thank you. It's a personal perspective, but I hope it's of use. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. It was quite useful for me, so I hope it was useful for everybody else. And next up in the line, I mean, if you have questions for specific speakers, I mean, if you can put them in the chat, then we on and off we can start asking some questions to panel people or people who have presented before. The next person up is Dr. Justina Stuzik. She works is a researcher at the Institute of Sociology at the Jagiellonian, very difficult name, University in Poland. She was in charge of work package 5, which is about expectations, social trust and relationships, and did the qualitative research at the intersection of children's and professionals' perspectives in school settings. Justina, it's all yours.
Thank you, Edwin. Can you see my screen? My presentation? Yeah, cool. Okay.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So my name is Justina Struzik, as Edwin just said, and I'm from Jagiellonian University in Krakow. And today, together with me, there are also my colleagues from the team, Krystyna Slany, Magdalena Ślusarczyk, and Marta Varat, and we are responsible for the study all together. So I just wanted to share their names with you as well. So today, I have to say that I think that I have a very difficult task, because the research that I want to present, the work package 5 of the Child Up project, is actually still an ongoing research. We are in the middle of our fieldwork, going to schools, or at least contacting them, maybe I should say, online, and trying to do qualitative research. So I think that this is quite difficult for me to talk about any results yet, as we are still doing interviews. But I will just try to give you some preliminary results from Poland. Today I will present mostly some theoretical framework of the work package 5. Which is titled Qualitative Research on the Perspective of Professionals and Children. And then, as I said, I will also go to some results from Poland, but very, very preliminary. So in our study, in work package 5, we take as our main goal the exploration of 2 different perspectives. On the one hand, we want to look at different ways in which professionals might support children in school settings. And by professionals, we mean teachers, interpreters, mediators, but also social workers who sometimes cooperate with schools, or reception center staff. We want to look how this, let's say, different professionals, how they motivate children to learn, and how they shape, if they shape, their agency. In addition, we also want to look at how they experience and negotiate their relationship with children, with their families, with other institutions that might be important or responsible for implementing inclusive or educational policies. So the first perspective that we want to explore in Work Package 5 is professionals' perspective, let's say. And the second perspective is the perspective of children, both migrant and non-migrant children. And in this case, we want to explore how children perceive their participation in school life, in different activities, how they negotiate their relationships with their peers, with families, with teachers, also with these different professionals such as mediators or social workers. We want to look how they think about their desired future and what kind of expectations they have regarding their educational life, let's say. So these two perspectives are actually very much crucial in our study. So as I said, this is a qualitative research conducted in 7 European countries. These countries were already mentioned by Claudio Donti, so I will not repeat this information. We plan to conduct both focus group interviews and individual interviews. We were thinking about conducting individual interviews with professionals mainly, that you can see listed in this slide, and focus group interviews with migrant and non-migrant children, so basically mixed focus groups interviews. And we wanted to conduct FGI with children because we were thinking about the way in which, through different interactions, knowledge is produced, and this perspective of this way of producing knowledge was much more important for us. But of course, unfortunately, the pandemic happened, and this actually made everything much more difficult for all of the countries, actually, all of the 7 countries. And of course, organizing focus group interviews could be done remotely, could be done online, but this is a very challenging method. So we decided to, let's say, reformulate our methodology a bit. And some of the research we conduct right now only remotely, and in some cases we decided to switch to shift from focus group interviews to individual interviews. But we also decided, and this is I think important, to use the current conditions, that is pandemic basically, not only as a challenge and a huge barrier and so on, but also as an opportunity to look at the impact of the pandemic on students' experiences and well-being that was mentioned by, I'm sorry, I know that you said how I should pronounce your name, but I forgot. Ian? No. Okay. Sorry, and also the impact, on the well-being that you mentioned. So we decided to use, the condition that we live in to explore more how the pandemic pandemic impacts children. Okay, Also to this key issues that I have already mentioned, these two different perspectives of teacher and children, I would like to add some key other topic that we explore within our study. That is, for example, gender relations. It's something, or gender orders, one could say. This is something that is very important for us. We also, like as a Krakow team, we are a part of a gender research team. So this is, let's say, our expertise in a way. So we are looking in this case how children experience and negotiate gender roles and expectations in school settings. And we also want to analyze children's sense of agency. We are looking at, among other things, school conditions that can enhance agency, but also to those school conditions that might undermine it. And we also explore hybrid identity that was already mentioned by Claudio Dondi. That is the way in which children combine or mix elements of different cultures. And so far, okay, so this I hope also important because, as I said, this is an ongoing research, but nevertheless, I would like to share some results from the study. So I decided to present a bit from teachers' perspective in Poland. So far, we conducted 13 individual interviews with teachers from the region that was already mentioned by Shannon, that is from Kraków, but also from Lublin region. And this is also important because these experiences of teachers from Kraków, which is a big city, and Lublin region with some small towns, is also very different. While the experiences of teachers from Kraków indicate a relatively small number of migrant pupils in school, the data from the Lublin region concerns schools at reception centers or close to the reception centers. And in this case, all the children from the reception center go to the same school. That's why they are very visible or represented in this particular school that we research. And the teachers that we interviewed or talked with emphasized above all that many activities for integration were undertaken from the bottom up. This was very important statement for them. So they actually underline lack of institutional support, and you can see this lack of institutional support in the middle part of this slide, when you can see how teachers frame their experience of working with migrant children. So they said during the interviews that there is a visible shift between two different phases. One phase that took place in Poland over 15 years ago, when actually the first, or maybe not the first, but let's say that the first reception of migrant children started to happen, reception to schools. And this phase could be referred as the shock phase. So you can see also in this quote from one of the teachers that we talked with. And the second phase, which is, and of course, this shock phase, meant for them dealing with conflicts in the classroom, the language difficulties, and first of all, lack of tools to cope with such situations. And then they describe this today's more contemporary experience in terms of a certain normalization. And they underline that through the years, they managed somehow, even without this institutional support, to search for some solutions, as I said, usually bottom-up solution introduced to schools. I also would like to sign now some key issues that somehow emerge from the Polish part of the research and are important.
Christina, sorry, in between, we're running a bit out of time, so I don't want to really rush you, but I do have to. I'm sorry.
Okay. Anyway, I just wanted to say that this is almost the last slide. I just wanted to say that we right now are exploring or analyzing these three different dimensions of experiences that become very much visible in the narratives. The one is about invisibility or visibility, sometimes even over visibility of migrant children. The second is about gender that I already mentioned, that our research shows that actually basically school and families are still spaces that reproduce traditional gender order very much. And the last part is about actually migrants from Ukraine or Belarus, which are, quite in a way, in terms of culture, close to Poland, that are often invisible in the system because they are considered to be not in need of any help or support because of the similar languages. Okay, thank you very much.
I'm sorry, we're just on a bit of a schedule. I saw some people taking pictures and everybody's taking notes. Don't worry, and early next week we'll be sending all the presentations to you so you can have a closer look at them. Our next person up is Dr. Sara Adamasi. She works for Unimore, one of the partners in the project. And she will share basically her experiences in terms of work package number 6. Clara, sorry, yeah, just explain, Sarah, what you have to say.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, so as Justina said, also WP6 is an ongoing work package. So we really don't have results for it now. We're trying to conduct and to conclude it in these days. So I don't know if I know, okay. So this is an evaluative research on some relevant examples of dialogic practices. This part of the research involves activities that are conducted by teachers, educators, psychologists, or associations within the schools where we are conducting the research. And this is, as I said, an evaluative type of research, which means that it takes into account both the processes and the results of the activities, and it aims to assess their effectiveness. So the methodology of this evaluative research is based on a positive experience that was done some years ago from the Charmed project, Shared Memories and Dialogue, which was an Erasmus Plus project, Key Action 3, and it was coordinated by the principal investigator of Child Up, which is the Department of Studies on Language and Culture of University of Modena, Reggio Emilia, specifically by Professor Claudio Baraldi. So this evaluative research will concern some kind of activities like second language teaching, language and intercultural mediation, intercultural education, and communication and dialogue facilitation. So the research will pay attention to the ways of enhancing integration through participation. And there are several phases and objectives that I present you. So one of the first phase, I would say, is a pre-test. And then at the end of this action, there will be also a post-test. So with this pre and post-test, we aim to understand the results of these activities in terms of active participation and satisfaction from the perspective of children and from a quantitative point of view. There is also a focus group that we conduct with children to understand the qualitative reflections about active participation and satisfactions of children. And the school activities are documented through videotaping. This is done in order to understand the adopted methods and their effectiveness for the management of dialogue and active participation. The analysis will include a gender dimension as well as for WUPI 5, as Justina just said. And there will be several reports to implement a discussion within the consortium. And there is a final report which includes a detailed analysis and evaluation of the activities. At the end of this work package, there is also a selection of research materials which will be included on the archive on the website of the project, and a final package of tools for evaluating and providing opportunities for further evaluation of other activities that will be also included on the website. So the collection of data is realized through a meshed method, which means that we video record, we video and audio record the activities. We deliver pre and post test, which means questionnaires to children. We realize focus groups with children. So the video recording can document if and in which way integration is based on active participation in the activities. They provide therefore qualitative and quantitative indicators to check the type of contents, the relevance, the forms and problems of interaction, and possible gender differences in participation and interaction. The pre-test and the post-test delivered through questionnaires enhance the understanding of children's expectation and perceptions on and of the activities. So they are based on the objectives. The pre-tests are based on the objectives of the activities and the expected outcomes, while the post-test checks if the objectives and the outcomes have been achieved. So the comparison between pre-test and post-test provide the short-term results of the activities. The post-test is also used to understand the children's evaluation of the activities and their products in terms of the relationship with the educators or the professionals that are working on the activities, and also amongst the children and the mates, the classmates. So the post-test is followed, as I said, by a focus group, which is also collecting that data on a qualitative level. And it aims to understand how children lived and what children experienced during these activities. So the meshed method is particularly useful because it allows for a comparison of the participation of migrant and non-migrant children, and thus allows to assess the level of integration through active participation, the types and levels of agency and possible gender biases, the functioning of dialogue and types of dialogic actions observed by children, professionals, and researchers, and possible expansion of agency beyond the school context. These are some of the activities that we are observing. So there are some classes, some courses of Italian as a second language. There are some theater workshop, psychological wellness meetings for the whole class. There is a Chinese language and culture course. There are some workshops on conflict, where of course children can express the conflicts that they are living within their class, but also trying to learn how to manage them and how to face this conflict. There is a workshop on citizenship and some workshops on identity. There is also a music workshop which aims to promote the intercultural dialogue. So this is everything. We are still collecting data. We are really in the middle of it. So I can't even give a preview of the results, unfortunately, but we hope to go on despite COVID and ended it by the end of this school year. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. I already saw that there was a question for you from a person called Dirigente. In your research, do you interact with school directors, local authorities, municipalities and districts, universities and migrant associations? What's your view on that?
Yes, we of course interact very much with school directors and also local authorities. The first step was to contact the school directors and the local authorities to present them the project and to evaluate with them their interest in taking part to it. Yeah, we also tried to get in touch with Migrant Association, although unfortunately in Italy the situation is a bit difficult because all these associations are on a national basis. So we couldn't get in touch with a macro association that was collecting several migrants from several communities. So it's very hard to manage this because you risk to enter in dialogue just to certain national communities and not others. So this is a bit difficult to manage.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now start a short panel discussion. We're a bit late, of course. So if people could unmute themselves who are part of the panel. If in the meantime, anybody has a question to a particular panelist or in general, just continue asking your questions or sending your remarks, and I'll try and include them into this about 15-minute part of the session. Claudio, can I start with you? In your view, what is the most crucial inclusion moment in migrants' children? And also, how has it been relevant? How has inclusion of migrant children been relevant in your own context? It's a broad question.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't have so much direct experience of these magic moments of inclusion. I totally agree with Johan's point about inclusion rather than integration. It's much more interesting to look at things from the individual perspective of feeling included than from the institutional point of view of integrating someone. Hopefully and luckily, the new documents of the European Commission and Council are going in this direction. I was just reading this morning the Council conclusion of the 18th of February. So there is some hope that the project is anticipating some of these contents, even if we are obliged to use integration in the title because it was the name of the topic in Horizon 2020. I think a lot of things I have read go in the sense of when children feel secure when they have this Swedish feeling that corresponds also to a Japanese term used in organizational science, the BO area, then the game is done. But that is a threshold level that unfortunately I have not experienced directly because I'm not a teacher of young people. I sometimes talk to post degree, so I have a different experience. They were already more than included in the College of Europe. But yeah, I think being able to generate this feeling of being secure is important, and not so much. I think there was a debate in our project between the feeling of belonging and the feeling of security. I think the feeling of belonging is not absolutely necessary because we are talking about not an assimilation, but we are talking about hybrid inclusion. And so it's important that it's not so important that they belong, but they need to feel safe in the new schooling environment and social environment in which they feel. The image of the stairs that Johan was presenting is very interesting. Really, I would like to adopt in the project how important it is.
I already see that there's a question for you. Let's get back to that after Justina gives some remarks, and so she can give her views as a researcher on what the most crucial inclusion moment is in a migrant child's life.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, this is a very difficult question. Also because I think that the paths of migration and the biographies and the stories of children, migrant children, are very much different. But I was thinking that what seems to be important from our research is, of course, peer relations. And I'm thinking about this moment of inclusion through making friendship, making friends with colleagues from class to feel to be part of. This was at least something that came out from the perspective of teachers. That's why I can recall it, like the moment when actually you could see that children are being included by peers, are just, you know, they are just peers and they are friends and very good colleagues. This is the important moment, but we are still not yet conducted research, qualitative research with children, only for focus group interviews. This is a very small group, and we are still waiting for the pandemic to be over, or at least to some changes. So I would actually say that, yeah, that the peer relations as the moment, or like this, I don't know, the space, the interactions with peers might be actually crucial here.
Thank you. Now the question from Dirigente was to Claudio. I think it's better if that is answered by a researcher on the team, because they are actually with their feet into the subject. Maybe, well, one of the researchers, Sarah, maybe can you just comment on that? How do you, or could you compare research between national cities, towns, to compare practices? So what are the differences between what happens in and out of the cities?
Well, we are not really comparing the activities, but we are collecting all of them in several countries and trying to give some guidelines for further interventions and to help to enhance the dialogic practices within schools. So it's not really a comparison to say, okay, in Sweden we see these, and in Italy we see these, but it's more on a European level to collect all the best practices and to make something which might help teachers and school professionals in general for the future.
I do remember speaking to our Swedish team in particular, that they were dealing with classes, particularly in Malmö, and that they had an extremely high number of migrant children, whereas also research was done in other countries where there were hardly any migrant children. And how do you collate that kind of information, or that kind of data?
Methodologically, I think it will be clarified how the several national situation, what the several national situation presented. So maybe, for example, the percentage of migrant children with a migrant background that we found in Italy, and those that were met by the Swedish, for example, researchers. But this is, I would say, an explanation that is due before presenting data. So the condition where we worked and how we worked, and how each team has chosen to deal with certain situations. I think this is also the same with COVID. I mean, each one of us had to face different situations. Some schools were online. In other countries, this online schooling wasn't really realizing. So we have to clarify all these situations.
May I just complement this, not so much on the methodological ground, but in general, to say that a little bit of the comparative dimension is in work package 3, the one that was introduced by Shannon in a previous intervention. And to answer the question, I think in order to get more example of how different contexts and different countries approach the issue from a normative, but also from a practical point of view, I would recommend to have a look at the report of work package number 3. Is a comparison between the 7 countries that are in the picture. Of course, it doesn't go to the level of the micro experience, but it gives an idea how in the country, in the cities, what are the norms, what are the most used practice, if there are support services of a certain kind that are taking place and supporting teachers, for example, in their, or school heads in the inclusion challenge.
Yeah. There was a question from a person called Martin. I think, Ian, that's quite an interesting question for you, since you were a school leader for many, many years. Could you comment on the role of sport in promoting integration and inclusion of migrant children? How did that go in practice?
Yeah, I think this ties in with what Justina said about peer-to-peer. The acceptance of peers is a fundamental aspect. And that goes back at this beginning thing of young people feeling accepted. Often when I'm thinking of when a new child, or possibly a migrant child, comes into a class, but any new child coming into a classroom, there is a feeling by all the class, the other children and so on, who is this person? And often it can be portrayed, if they are clearly of a different culture and so on, there can be hesitation in all, including the teacher, you know, who are feeling, how am I going to meet this challenge of integrating this child in? However, if the teacher can embrace it, and saying this, if you have a positive thing of saying this is a challenge, which we're up for it and is of useful, then that can go across to the children. And then when you come to things like sport or other activities, social activities, one of the greatest things is to see maybe new children coming in and they're playing and happy with the others in their peers outside, and you're feeling this thing, that there's this sense of them, you know, feeling included. And so the expressive arts, not just sport, have got a good role in this and choices in this. But I would also go back to say about the individual characteristics. This is very important too, this is not just for migrant children, this is for every child to have a unique sense of themselves within the group. It's important to be accepted in the group, but it's also important to have your individual characteristics, qualities seen by others. And that is really top conclusion.
And the last, I think the last question that we can handle in this slot from Paul Byrne, I guess that's a question to the researchers. So Justina, is there any study looking at sport as a vehicle to promote inclusion in schools?
Well, I can only say about the ongoing study that we are in, because I don't know any studies on sport actually. But I can say that in Polish case, the sport activities were actually very important. But what is important here is that these teachers were talking about sport as a vehicle to promote inclusion, or to basically to include actually among boys, among male students and male pupils, not among girls. And this was the study from, our part of the study from Lublin region, so mostly among refugee children. And sport activities actually weren't very attractive to girls. But I think that other activities, not sport activities, were probably more popular among girls. So I wouldn't maybe refer to sport as some special activity. I would say that this is just a pure activity. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for participating in this, question round / panel discussion. We prepared a short poll, which is basically one question, and the question is inclusion of migrant children in your own country or school a context, an issue that still needs to be tackled? I will open the poll now, so if you could just quickly respond to it, and then maybe one of our panelists could give a short remark on that. Okay, I hope everybody has seen the question. I'll give another like 15, 20 seconds for people to just give their views. It does look...
out.
Well, it looks overwhelmingly, I mean, it's basic. Maybe the question should have been answered in a different way. I'll share the results now. Just a moment. And as expected, I hope you can see basically 100% agree that inclusion of migrant children is still an issue in their either country or in their schools. I don't know, what do you think, Claudio? Is this very surprising, or is this something that you had expected?
No, well, I would have expected then the fact that the people are registering to this webinar also means that they are living it as an issue. Otherwise, they would not have come. But I think there is also an additional consideration to be made that the COVID-19 situation has broadened the inclusion's challenges. And I think this is a debate that is taking place in all the countries, and we are desperately trying to find ways to recover the time that was lost during the last 12 months. And this question allows me to remind you that next week, ESHA will send you a link to an electronic questionnaire in which we are asking you what has changed in the last year in the issue of inclusion of migrant children. What are the things that became more problematic, what are the things that by destabilizing the system may also open some new perspective, and if you have some problem to share or some success story to share, we would really like to engage you further in the dialogue with stakeholders that the project is fostering even more starting from next week. Thank you.
Great. Well, I'm very happy that that so many people have joined me on my on this momentous occasion of my birthday. So I hope that you will have a very nice day. I would also like to take the opportunity to tell you that all the presentations will be shared with you on Monday or Tuesday, so you can have a look at what has been discussed. If you have any questions, of course, you can pose them to us or the panelists. So just send in any emails or questions that you may have. Do join us, check out our website often, check out our posts on social media, and of course the ESHA social media. I would also like to invite you for our next session of our leadership seminar series, which will be on March the 26th, again at 2 p.m. in the afternoon for 1.5 hours. And the subject will be social innovation education. Rest me to say thank you all, and I really hope that you will have a very pleasant weekend ahead. Claudio, you still have something to say?
Yes, I want to say happy birthday, and I want to know if the interactive quiz is how old are you?
I am officially now 51 years old.
Oh my God, you look much younger. Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much for the compliment. It's a lot of oil of Olay.
Okay.
Konstantinos, you also had something to say?
I was just saying salute.
Yeah, well.
Thank you. It was excellent. Congratulations.
Thank you very much for the compliments, and I hope that that everybody had a good time, and everybody see you next time.
Ciao.